Hello and welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. This is part 2 of our special 3-part Interpreting China series based on Views from Taipei, essays by young Indian scholars on China, a compendium published recently by Carnegie India. The series brings together fresh perspectives from emerging Indian voices who have studied China from up close. Over 3 episodes, I'm speaking to the contributors of the compendium to explore China's military, economy, and border strategy. China's rise over the past 4 decades is well known, and much emphasis has been placed on China's economic rise, which we discussed last week in the episode on China's economy with Amit Kumar. Yet, equally important is another dimension of power, particularly hard power, that is, its military capabilities. China's armed forces, the People's Liberation Army, matters as much because the use of force and the threat of the use of force is another means through which states, including the People's Republic of China, advance their interests. Thus, the fortunes of the PLA matter for all states that have security competition or cooperation for that matter with China. Particularly in the past decade under Chinese President Xi Jinping, the PLA has undergone sweeping structural reforms, and it's worth exploring how these reforms have fared. I'm Saheb and Suyash, a senior research analyst in the Security Studies program at Carnegie India. Joining us for this episode is a distinguished guest, Suyash Desai. Suyash is one of the contributors to Views from Taipei, and his essay, The People's Liberation Army in the 2020s, buoyed by reforms, limited by roadblocks, outlines the sweeping structural reforms that President Xi Jinping has initiated inside the PLA, as well as their outcomes. Suyash is a non-resident fellow in the Asia program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and a political scientist specializing in China's defense, foreign policies, and nuclear strategy. His research focuses on Chinese military affairs, security and foreign policy issues, nuclear strategy, India-China relations, and strategic and security developments in East Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. He also authors the PLA Bulletin, a newsletter providing news and analysis on the PLA. Suyash, welcome to Interpreting India.
Hi, Saheb. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We'll start with a broad question on the People's Liberation Army's state of play. Can you tell us at the outset, what is it doing right and succeeding in, and what are the challenges and roadblocks facing it? And you can draw on your piece for this.
I will come to my piece, but broadly speaking, I divide the People's Liberation of Army's past 10 years into 3 or 4 hits and 3 or 4 misses. The first hit is about rapid modernization across all domains. When we talk about all domains, we talk about land, we talk about sea, we talk about air, we talk about space, we talk about cyber, we talk about networks, and so on and so forth. So the modernization that it has achieved, especially after it started reforms in 2015, honestly speaking, the reform was started in 2003 itself, but under Xi Jinping, the reform got a kickstart. And the modernization that it has achieved is mind-blowing. And that is one of the most important hits for the PLA. The second one is heading towards multi-domain integrated joint operations. So from 1993, when PLA learned from, that is a specialty about the PLA, that it always learns from others' war. So 1993 was when Gulf War happened and it moved towards joint operation. And then it has shifted its focus towards multi-domain integrated joint operation in a localized areas. Why in a localized area? That's because all of China's main battles or main conflicts are in a localized area around its border. So for a long time, people are saying that it is moving towards this. But in reality, if you've seen past 3-4 years, it is genuinely taking efforts towards achieving multi-domain integrated joint operations through its exercises, through its training. And all the exercises that happened around Taiwan, all the joint straight exercises, joint strike exercises, Thunder Strait exercises, they were reflective of People's Liberation Army's slow but steady steps towards integrated multi-domain joint operation. The third important hit towards this for PLA is PLA is a bit bullish after the India-Pakistan conflict. That's because corruption was a major miss, but limited success of Chinese weapons and testing of Chinese weapons in a real war situational area, pressurized situational area, is what is making PLA a bit bullish, relatively bullish, because the at the end of the day, a lot of air defense, India had also taken out a lot of air defense systems, Chinese air defense systems in Pakistan. So this is a limited hit. These are the three hits, but the 3 or 4 misses are corruption. Corruption has been a long-standing problem for past 70, 80, 90 years in the PLA, and we have seen in 2023. There are actually 3 waves of corruption. I'll get into that later when I talk about my piece. But corruption is the biggest miss that PLA is facing, or the biggest battle that PLA is facing. Demand supply problem. All this modernization that PLA is doing, it needs people to man those machines. And if you see historically, PLA is a cadre-based army. So the not very well qualified people from grassroots are generally the people who are arming the PLA. So there is a big demand supply mismatch where all these modern weapons, especially with the Navy and Air Force, they don't have personnel to man these weapons. That's the second miss. Third miss is about urban warfare capabilities. If the first and the most important area that PLA wants to target is Taiwan, they need to specialize in urban warfare capabilities, which has not been its strength, and there are no exercises indicating that it can perform very well in urban warfare capabilities. And the fourth is delay on all targets. Xi Jinping has given targets to PLA to achieve for modernization, informatization, and becoming a world-class force, but it is terribly delayed on all the targets. Though they are doing this, the reforms are going on, but it is delayed. These are the 4 important misses for the PLA.
So I actually had a question about the delays. And so what are the implications of these hits and these misses for PLA readiness or lack of it for a Taiwan contingency? And you made clear that there are delays. We've heard of a 2027 timeline, or we've heard of a 2049 timeline. So can you sort of talk more about how ready is the PLA fundamentally for a Taiwan contingency or not?
PLA is definitely not ready for a Taiwan contingency. Point number 1, why it is not ready? Point number 1, because of corruption. Important aspect of the piece was about corruption. There are 3 waves of corruption. After Xi Jinping came to power, PLA has always been corrupt, and especially from in 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, there was a huge wave of corruption in the PLA. But I'll only stick to the recent 10-15 years after Xi Jinping came to power. After Xi Jinping came to power, I divide PLA corruption into 3 waves of corruption and purges. The first one was the first major wave where two CMC vice chairmen were purged. The second wave was 2023 when Rocket Force was purged. Also, the former defense minister was purged, and the Rocket Force, 6 or 7 officials from the Rocket Forces were purged, including the commander and the commissar. These are the 2 most important players in PLA, in any force. And the third is the recent one, when there are a lot of purges that are happening right now, including He Wei-tong, who is again the vice chairman of the CMC. All this has resulted, some people say that this is because of corruption, which can be partly true, but there is also a lot of factionalism within the PLA. So, for example, there is Shaanxi faction, there is Fujian faction. That's one big problem. Then there is equipment department faction, Air Force faction. That's other big problem. Due to this corruption, the purges are happening, and due to the purges, the morale of the soldiers, morale of PLA personnel is all-time low. This is one important reason. Even if there are modern weaponaries available, if the morale of personnel is low, it will not result into a victory or preparedness for the PLA for a Taiwan contingency. That is one important reason why Taiwan contingency is not happening. 2, although they are they are not heading towards Taiwan contingency. 2, I remember vaguely in 2021, PLA had given a target of 2027 for Taiwan contingency. Or at least the Western analysts had interpreted that 2027 is when Taiwan contingency would happen. But that is not the case, because 2027, although 2027 is when PLA would complete 100 years of its existence, 2027 was a target for PLA to build something on to go to 2035. So 2035 was a target for PLA to achieve informatization. And there was a big gap between 2020, when it was achieving modernization, and 2035 when it was achieving informatization. So 2027 was a small target for PLA to use it as a catapult to jump into 2035. But a lot of Western analysts assumed that it is a target for Taiwan, which is not the case. And those delays are happening along with the personal problem, along with motivation that the PLA is resulting into PLA not being ready for Taiwan operation. I also have 6 factors. If I can decide, I can quickly show why they are preparing for Taiwan, but it is not happening in the immediate case. I divide those 6 factors into mobilization. So there is something called as mobilization changes, reforms that started in 2022. In my opinion, this is one of the most important reforms that PLA conducted since its existence. If you put all mobilization reforms together, it is hinting that PLA is trying to mobilize the army for a Taiwan contingency or a border contingency. To stocking up of, in the past 3-4 years, PLA has been stocking up its energy supplies, stocking up its food supplies. Army only does that when it is thinking of a contingency. A lot of analysts have said that this is because of the unpredictability due to re-election of President Trump. That could be one reason, but Taiwan could also be another reason. Third point, nature of military exercises. As you have seen from 2020, the nature of military exercises have changed across Taiwan. So that's point number 3. From 2018, a lot of standardization has happened. What is standardization? So for example, Army, Navy, Air Force have different equipment, different weapons. You need to standardize all of them for each of them to talk to each other to achieving integrated joint operation. That is another indicator that they are preparing. And why do you need these forces to talk to each other, or battalions to talk to each other for achieving something when they go for a conflict or an operation?
Situational awareness.
Yes, yeah. Situational awareness. Then the fourth, then another aspect is they are calling specialized veterans back. Specialized veterans who are trained in urban warfare, who are trained in cross-strait. They are calling them back. So these are the indicators that are important to say or claim that PLA is preparing for a Taiwan contingency, but it is delayed and it will not happen very soon because of the corruption problems within the PLA, and they are not yet ready for an amphibious operation. Because as you are aware, amphibious operation is one of the most difficult operations that can happen. So they are preparing, but not yet ready.
So you touched upon these mobilization changes. The sense I get from your piece is that this is one step beyond civil-military integration. It's fusion. So can you tell me about the Chinese thinking here? And is it possible for us to understand how the civilian side of things feels about this fusion?
Okay, so this is an evolving reform. It only started in 2018 and it really started in 2022. So what happened in 2022 is a number of mobilization offices were created across China. This was in Tibet, Xinjiang, Chengdu, Fujian, Beijing, Shanghai, any major place, Inner Mongolia. You think of a major place, an office has been created over there. These offices are primarily with the civilian side of the things. They are not with the PLA. They are with the prefecture level offices, party offices. Now, these offices are empowered with multiple roles. First, to prepare logistics and work for the PLA, to support the PLA during any conflict. 2, to recruit personnel at the local level. 3, to carry out all the administrative work that PLA does at the local level, so the force would be independent of the administrative work and they could majorly focus on force development and operations. Operations, I know, are with the theater commands, but force development per se. These are three important things that they are preparing. Also to recruit localized cadres. This task is with these offices. Why are localized cadres important? I'll give you an India-specific example. So, for example, when you are moving things around, when we are bringing people from Eastern Theater Command is what is responsible for Tibet, also what is responsible for Taiwan, When you are bringing people from sea level to Himalayas, then they take time to get acquainted with you cannot parachute them into this high altitude regions. So you need to keep a permanent presence over there, and then you can revolve the PLA around, you can rotate the PLA around. This permanent presence would be from the local area, and these offices would be responsible. Offices would be responsible for recruiting people who would then be training with the PLA. For a permanent presence, and they are mostly Tibetan, so they are doing that in Tibet. So they are taking care of the civilian side of things and freeing PLA to develop their force and mobilize. This is something. And then again, after that, if you have seen, from 2022 is when Nancy Pelosi happened. And then PLA started certain specific type of exercises where the whole force has been mobilized across different theaters. So one aspect was the civilian military aspect. The other aspect was how does the force mobilize to perform integrated joint operations. So these two things, as I've said earlier, this is an evolving project, but these two things are very important to understand how PLA mobilize for an conflict or a war situation.
Can we see China's border villages, the Xiaoqiang well-off villages, as part of this civil-military fusion mobilization strategy?
I mean, you can not per se, but you can put that it is something to do with civil military. It is. I'm not sure if I would put it as mobilization, but definitely civil military integration, because the villages came up in 2017. It started coming up in 2017. It was completely established by 2019, 2020, and now they have developed it into a permanent settlement, and now they are bringing in people and putting into those villages. But this is not the first time they have done that. Now they are also building such villages in Xinjiang along the west. But they have done such things in South China Sea as well. So when you establish a permanent feature on a barren island, I'm talking about South China Sea, then your claim judicially becomes very strong. If you remember 2015, when the Philippine dispute happened, arbitration had claimed that there is no life on this island, so China cannot. One of the claims was that there is no life on this island, so China cannot claim these islands. And since then, they started building permanent presence, started growing vegetation on these barren islands. Similarly, when you build these villages, one, they act as an outside military post. But if you build a permanent settlement, then the other country, the adversary or the claimant, cannot push back these villages. So it becomes a natural barrier post. So that is the second reason. Yes, it's a part of civil-military integration, but I would not go to call it mobilization. When you call it mobilization, you mean to mobilize forces to do something. It is rather a permanent settlement of the dispute, so the adversary cannot push forward.
Okay. One of the other aspects that your piece talks about is party-army relations. And so what's the state of these? Because the assumption in the discourse is that the PLA follows the CCP and Xi Jinping's directives to the T, as professional militaries perhaps do. But your piece makes it clear that it's not a one-way street. There's some pushback, and as you said, factionalism, corruption. So tell me about this part.
Yes. So one of the important aspects of the piece was party-army relations. In Chinese, it is called as Tang Zi Hui Qiang. So I will give you 5 or 6 important conferences that are very important since Xi Jinping came to power. The first was 2012 18 Party Congress, November 2014 Gutian Forum, 2017 19 Party Congress, 2022 20 Party Congress, and recent 2024 Ya'an meeting. One message was constant across 10 years in all these meetings is an attempt to improve party control over the PLA, over the army, which is not a country's army, but which is a party's army. This has been one message that has been constant. China knows that Xi Jinping and the CM's, the party knows that party cannot rule China without the PLA. So that was one message that has been constant. However, if I have to go into a political science theory aspect, there is something called as organizational theory, where any organization over 100 years, because PLA will be completing 100 years in 2027, takes a life of its own. It brings a life of its own. It develops its own formulas. It develops its own structures, its own foundations, its own rules. And it's like a small tree which becomes independent slowly. And Xi and CPC are afraid of that. That is why there is this message which has been constantly put through every meeting, that the party, that the army belongs to party. And this insecurity is manifested through multiple ways. Corruption, yes, it's a problem. But the purges is not solely, we cannot put purges are happening because of corruption. There is no causation in that. Purges can happen because of factionalism. Purges can happen because of other things. And so there are three, as I pointed out, there are three waves of corruption or purges that happened. First was in 2012, 2013, when Vice Chairman Su Tsai-ho and Vice Chairman Kuo Pao-shing were purged. Then the second was with Rocket Force, and the third was the recent one. So the party this also shows that the leadership is insecure, and still hasn't got a complete grasp over the entire party. And the relation there, though very strong over the years, is still not strong enough to be secured about purges not happening. If you believe that purges were not only because of corruption, which I think were not only because of corruption, were also because of factionalism. So it's a very thin thread that the party and the PLA is attached with. And that to take care of that, these purges are happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Suyash, you touched upon party-army relations, and you brought out clearly why that matters, why new patterns of mobilization matter. But I wanted to sort of take a step back and ask, why did you choose these four aspects, political control, civil military mobilization, the changing nuclear posture, and the modernization of training regimes? Why did you specifically choose these four case studies to, form a judgment on the PLA's sort of readiness, and why do you feel they're relevant?
Okay. So party-army relations, why did I choose these four aspects? I'll go one by one through each one of them. I've already spoken on party-army and mobilization. So party-army, because party-army is the most important dynamic. It is the party's army, and that is why, and what the relation that the party has with the army and the army has with the party will define everything that PLA does. And that is why I selected party-army as the first and the most important aspect. To mobilization, because I have already pointed out, I think it is one of the most important reforms that PLA is undertaking. People still don't realize the importance of this reform because it is relatively new. But if they would manage to do what they are trying to do, the way in which PLA mobilizes completely changes. And that is why I selected mobilization. I have already talked about this. Now I come to the third important part, nuclear. The problem with nuclear is that generally nuclear is at least in India, scholars look at nuclear dynamic as very stable. But in the past 4, 5, maybe 6 years, there are a lot of changes that are happening within PLA's nuclear strategy, broad and narrow changes. I borrow this from Fiona Cunningham. Fiona Cunningham is a professor in University of Pennsylvania. She's one of the foremost scholars on nuclear strategy. I borrowed this from her arguments. I divide China's nuclear strategy in 4 boxes: size, diversity, accuracy, and readiness. And changes are happening in all the 4 boxes. Size, we already know number of warheads. Last decade, there were 200 warheads with China. Now, if the Pentagon report is to be believed, they already have 500 warheads. This is a big change. After 40 years, that change has happened. And they could reach to 1,000 in 2030 and 1,500 warheads in 2035. This is a major change that has happened. This is about the size. Then you look at diversity. When you talk about diversity, they have theater range weapon, that is DF-26. They have continental range weapons, that is DF-42, DF-41, ballistic missiles. So they are also diversifying their delivery systems. Now they also have a functional nuclear triad. When in 2018, PLA Air Force was reintroduced to carry out nuclear missions, though their capacities can be limited, but they have a functional nuclear triad. And also, if you remember 2021 or 2022, when they tried fractional orbital bombardness. So look at the diversification of delivery systems that has happened in just past 10 years, majorly in past 5 to 7 years. That's diversity. Third point, accuracy. We realize the importance of accuracy during the conventional conflict that took place between India and Pakistan. Now, the precision strike, they are working on their precision strike, size, guidance to hit counter force. And that is where the space system comes up. We see every month China is launching something into the space. So they are also working on the accuracy, and that is where the recent changes, where aerospace force was introduced in 2024 April. That comes into play. And the fourth one is readiness. Again, very important change. China, like India, believes in no first use. That has not changed. But for majority of past 40, 45 years, their delivery systems were separated from their warheads. Sometime in the last decade, I don't know when, but maybe 2016, 2018, 2019 onwards, from then on, they are slowly moving towards launch on warning operational system. What is launch on warning? In a very simple terms, if I am A and you are B, and I launch a nuclear weapon or I launch a missile, before it takes out my counter force, you should be able to launch to take out the adversary's counter force. That is launch on warning. And for launch on warning to be successful, you need to mate at least a part of your delivery systems with your nuclear warheads. And that, because they are moving towards launch of warning, or they have already moved toward launch on warning partially, they are mating their delivery systems with the nuclear warhead. These are 4 important changes. And why did I select this? One, there is the US-China dynamic that is happening. But we also forget that whatever China does, there is a spiral that happens in South Asia with India and then with Pakistan. So that is why I think Indian scholars need to look at this very carefully. Look at this very carefully about the changes that are happening in the nuclear domain. And the point number 4 is about joint exercises, about the exercises. This is one of the most important things that PLA has been working on, achieving multi-domain joint operation exercises. And why I selected it now? Because they are, in the past 4 or 5 years, they are moving towards integrated multi-domain joint exercises, and which is now apparent in Eastern Theater Command and Western Theater Command. More in Eastern Theater Command due to the 5 or 6 exercises that recently happened since Nancy Pelosi. 3 joint straight exercises and 1 thunder. I think it's called thunder straight or joint lightning, something like this. And also in the Western Theater Command, which is responsible for Tibet, India. Since 2018, they are trying to do joint exercises between Air Force and Army. A battalion from Air Force is working jointly with a battalion from Army, or a battalion from Border Force is working jointly with a battalion from Army. So at a limited level in Western Theater Command, and at a vast, expansive level in Eastern Theater Command. Why vast, expansive level in Eastern Theater Command? Because Eastern Theater Command has always been the testing lab for the PLA. All major reforms first happened in Eastern Theater Command. Eastern Theater Command is responsible for Taiwan, And then it is followed next by Western Theater Command, which is also reflective of its strategy. Its primary direction is Taiwan, and then secondary direction is India. So that is why I thought these are four most important factors for understanding PLA. And that is why I selected them.
So on the nuclear bit, you're saying it's changing, and you evidence that through changing Chinese capabilities. My question is, if strategy is a relationship between means, ways, and ends, then to what end is China increasing its nuclear means? And in other words, why is China's nuclear strategy changing? And what is it changing in response to?
China's nuclear strategy is changing in response to US's nuclear strategy. It's majorly because of the US-China dynamic, right? Because of the advanced precision-guided weapons that US has placed in Japan, counter-force weapon that US has placed in Japan or in Philippines. China is worried that if in case of an escalation, China would not get a chance to perform counter-force operation. If your installations are taken out in the first strike itself, then how would you perform your counter-force operation? And China doesn't subscribe to China subscribes to no first use strategy, right? So that is why a partial mating is happened. So there is a launch on warning in case of an escalation. At least some of it survives. So it's always, the change always happens. Though there is always, the first most important is US-China dynamics, which then has a domino on India-China, India-Pakistan, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so then my question is not just on, the nuclear bit, but also on all that we've spoken about the PLA's readiness. What does this mean for India-China security competition? You have an India-China relationship that now scholars have started referring to as armed coexistence. So what does this PLA readiness, what does this, and you can separately talk about this changing nuclear strategy, what does this mean for the India-China relationship and the border security dynamic?
See, that India-China relationship is very complicated. This is a new status quo that we have to live with on East and West, where both the borders would be live. I know there is a détente right now where both the countries are looking inwards and towards a new relationship. But you just need one spark at the border and for re-engagement on the border. And all this modernization, though they are aimed towards the United States, one of the byproduct of it is partially also aimed towards India. Because India is not a small power. So the direct result of all this modernization is a conventional arms race that happens in India, China, in South Asia, if you also include larger South Asia, if you also include China in that. So China is modernizing, India starts modernizing, Pakistan starts modernizing, and resulting into a much complex two-front escalated tense situation for India on the India-China border and India-Pakistan border.
So, and yeah, I think the important point is even if both India and China follow no first use, that doesn't mean that any sort of nuclear signaling cannot take place. So, for example, Adil Brar, in fact, and others have written about, and I don't know how much of this is in the public domain, that even during this 2020 standoff 2021, China did place its strategic bombers close to the India-China border as well. So definitely, I think this is a cause for concern.
But I think, Saheb, that signaling is more conventional than nuclear, because if you see purely India, so I will draw a very thick line, not even a thin line, between India-China nuclear signaling and India-Pakistan nuclear signaling. Yes, whatever the changes that China does to its nuclear strategy will have an impact on India, and it will also do the changes on, it will also maybe conduct changes in its own nuclear strategy, posturing, etc. But both of them are no first use nuclear forces. So the posturing doesn't matter here. And the posturing is more conventional unless something goes wrong in launch on warning. One caveat here is the DF-26 missiles, which are majorly, it's DF-26, they are Guam killers. Because it's called Guam killers because it's a ballistic missile and it's hot swappable ballistic missile. What is a hot swappable ballistic missile? That it can be used as a conventional warhead and it can also be used as a nuclear warhead. You can swap a warhead. Yes, hypothetically, in case of an escalation, if DF-26 is used and the adversary doesn't realize if it's a nuclear weapon or a conventional weapon, that is where the problem comes in. So intermingling of delivery systems is a problem in this dynamic. Launch on warning could be a problem in this dynamic. And if you put intermingling and launch of warning together, it is definitely a problem. But apart from these two things, the India-China nuclear situation is very stable because both the countries subscribe to no first use nuclear doctrine.
Okay. No, that is good to know. For my last question, Suyash, I just want to come to the events of the past few weeks. How do you assess there's been a lot of debate about the performance of Chinese systems in this present India-Pakistan crisis. What is your assessment? What is your takeaway? And your takeaway can also be that it is too early to draw a conclusion.
On India-Pakistan?
On the performance of Chinese weapon systems in the present India-Pakistan military conflict that took place. Because, I mean, you must have seen images of supposedly PL-15 air-to-air missile debris and other sort of narratives circling around. But I wanted to get your sense.
I think their air defense systems performed terribly. Chinese air defense system with Pakistan, because we could take out all of them. At least reportedly, we could take out all the air defense system. But there is a major caveat here. The delivery systems that Pakistan get is not high quality delivery systems. They are low to medium quality delivery systems. And the delivery systems that India has is a much better quality delivery system. So we could take out all their delivery systems. But that happened second day onwards, when Indian Air Force and Indian Armed Forces were completely given a free hand. On the first day, when we were only hitting the terrorist targets, and there was a counter-force reply by Pakistan, their weapons performed decently well. Not reportedly taking out some of our assets, but in the case of conflict, there is always going to be, reportedly, we don't know. But in a case of conflict, we have to be ready that there is always going to be collateral damage. Mm-hmm. That is the rule of the conflict. So we don't know what has happened there. But I am very sure that their defense, their air defense systems have performed terribly, and because we could take out all of them. However, in case of a US-Taiwan conflict, US-China conflict, or in case of India-China conflict, this is going to be a very different situation. Yeah. Because we are talking about, in India-Pakistan, it was Chinese weapons against a combination of Israeli, Indian, and Russian weapons. But in case of India-China conflict, it would be advanced Chinese weapons, which were not used in the India-Pakistan conflict. Neither J-20s were used, nor DFs were used, not advanced cruise missiles were used, nor advanced air defense systems were used. But India was using advanced weapons. And the situation would be very different in case of an India-China conflict. And US-China conflict, again, we don't know how would Chinese weapon do against advanced US weapons, because this was not the testing of advanced US weapons or advanced Chinese weapons. Right. But yes, definitely their air defense system was a failure. Yes, they achieved some success. Definitely they achieved some success on the first day. But from the second day itself, it was a big failure on Chinese weapon systems in Pakistan.
Thank you, Suyash. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you, a wide-ranging conversation, I must say, about the PLA and the ramifications for South Asia and the neighborhood, and Taiwan, of course. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Saheb. Thank you. It's always good talking to you. Thank you.
We'll be back next week with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on X, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening. See you next time.